It started with a smell, faint but distinct, lingering in the air like a ghost that refused to be ignored. I came home earlier than usual that day, the sun still hanging lazily in the sky, casting a warm glow through the windows. The house was silent, too silent, and something about it felt off. I placed my bag by the door, took a deep breath, and there it was, that unfamiliar scent. It wasn't hers, and it sure as hell wasn't mine. It was musky, masculine, like a mixture of sweat and cologne, the kind that doesn't belong in a house where only one man lives. My fingers clenched into fists, a slow-burning anger bubbling in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think rationally, even though every fiber of my being screamed that something was wrong. I walked through the hallway, my footsteps unnaturally loud against the hardwood floor. The living room looked normal, couch pillows slightly disheveled, coffee mug still on the table, TV remote half hidden under a blanket. But the scent was still there, stronger now, guiding me like a bloodhound to something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. As I turned toward the bedroom, my pulse quickened. The door was slightly ajar, something that never happened because Lauren was obsessed with keeping it shut. She always said she hated the idea of someone peeking into our personal space, as if our room was some kind of sacred sanctuary. I pushed the door open slowly, my eyes scanning the space. The bed was made, just like she always left it before going to work, but there was something off. A slight wrinkle on the left side, a dip in the mattress that suggested someone had sat there recently. My heart pounded in my ears as I stepped further in, every breath feeling heavier than the last. That's when I saw it, a single sock, black with a gray heel, peeking out from under the bed. That wasn't mine. My head spun, thoughts colliding like a train wreck, my body frozen in place. A single sock shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. It meant everything. I reached down, hesitated for a moment, then grabbed it. It was still warm, as if it had just been taken off. My stomach twisted into knots, my hands shaking as I clenched the fabric. Lauren wasn't home yet. That was the only reason I wasn't losing my mind completely, the only thing keeping me from tearing the whole room apart. But someone had been here. Someone who shouldn't have been. I wasn't a fool. I wasn't one of those guys who ignored the obvious signs, who convinced themselves that nothing was happening while their wife was getting bent over by some stranger in their own bed. I walked to the bathroom, my legs moving on autopilot, my mind clouded with a toxic mix of rage and denial. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I had my answer. The shower had been used recently. Water droplets clung to the glass like fingerprints on a crime scene, and the scent was even stronger in here, filling my lungs with the evidence I needed. I reached for her towel, brought it to my nose, and that was it, the final nail in the coffin. That same cologne. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the way it had been done so brazenly, so carelessly, as if I were too stupid to ever put the pieces together. It was the audacity of it all, the sheer arrogance of believing I wouldn't notice. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. I needed to know who the hell had been in my house, who had touched my wife, who had left their sock under my bed like a trophy. I stormed out of the bathroom, my mind racing with 1,000 scenarios. Could it have been someone she worked with? A gym trainer? An old friend? My stomach churned at the thought of her with someone else, at the mental image of her laughing, moaning, completely lost in the moment while I was out working my ass off, believing we were building a future together. I paced the room, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Calling her wouldn't do anything. She'd lie. She'd make up some excuse, some half-assed story to cover her tracks. No, I needed proof. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to catch her in the act. That's when I noticed something else. The closet door was slightly open. My gut told me to look, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to. I reached for the handle, yanked it open, and there, sitting on the floor, was a crumpled-up t-shirt. Not mine. The smell hit me instantly, making my stomach turn. I picked it up, staring at the logo on the front, some gym brand I didn't recognize. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was running purely on instinct, on fury. I grabbed the sock and the t-shirt, shoved them into a plastic bag, and left the house. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait around for Lauren to give them to me. When she walked through the door later that night, all smiles and fake exhaustion, I was sitting in the living room, waiting. The plastic bag was on the coffee table, and the moment she saw it, her whole demeanor changed. "Hey, babe," she said cautiously, dropping her purse onto the counter. "What's that?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my eyes locked onto hers. "You tell me." She frowned, taking a step closer, but there was a flicker of something in her expression, fear, maybe, or guilt. She glanced at the bag, then back at me. What do you mean? I reached in, pulled out the sock, and dangled it between us. Whose is this? Her face paled, her throat bobbing as she swallowed hard. I don't know. Maybe it's yours. I let out a cold laugh, shaking my head. Try again. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, for a lie that would make this all go away. But she had nothing. She knew it. I knew it. And that's when she made the mistake of looking away, her gaze dropping to the floor, unable to meet mine. That was all the confirmation I needed. Lauren stood there like a trapped animal, her lips slightly parted, her mind scrambling to stitch together a lie that I might believe. Her eyes flickered between me and the sock dangling from my hand, as if she could will it out of existence by refusing to acknowledge it. I could see the gears turning in her head, calculating, analyzing, trying to decide whether to feign innocence, deflect, or break down into some bullshit emotional performance. I leaned forward, my grip tightening around the sock, daring her to say something that wouldn't insult my intelligence. She forced a small laugh, but it was dry, lifeless, the kind of laugh people let out when they realize they're cornered. I have no idea whose that is, she said, her voice light, casual, but her fingers twitched by her sides, betraying the nervous energy coursing through her. Maybe it's one of yours from the laundry? You know how things get mixed up sometimes. I let her words hang in the air for a few seconds, watching her, waiting to see if she had anything better to offer. I could see the discomfort settling in, her stance shifting as she crossed her arms over her chest. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into the plastic bag, pulled out the crumpled gym t-shirt, and let it drop onto the table between us. And this? I asked, my voice calm too calm. Is this mine too? Her entire face changed in an instant, her skin paling just a fraction, her mouth pressing into a tight line as she stared at the shirt like it had personally offended her. The lie was right there on the tip of her tongue. I could see it, but she hesitated for just a second too long. That's all it took. That single moment of hesitation where she considered whether it was worth doubling down or finally admitting the truth. She let out a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling, and then she shook her head slightly, as if trying to convince herself that whatever she was about to say would make this all go away. Okay, look, she started, her voice softer now, carefully measured. I don't know where that came from, but I swear to God, there's nothing going on. Maybe one of my coworkers left it in my car and I accidentally brought it in with my stuff. I felt my jaw clench so hard that my teeth ached. Are you serious? I asked, my voice sharper now, cutting through the space between us. A coworker left their shirt in your car, and somehow it magically found its way into our bedroom? And let me guess, the sock just decided to crawl under our bed on its own? She exhaled loudly, her frustration bubbling to the surface, like I was the unreasonable one for not swallowing her garbage excuse. I don't know, Daniel, she snapped, running a hand through her hair. I don't keep track of every single thing that comes into this house. Maybe it got mixed in with the laundry or I slammed my hand down on the table, making her jump. Cut this, Lauren, I interrupted, my patience gone. I want the truth. Right now. She stared at me, her expression shifting again, this time into something colder, more defensive. You're overreacting, she muttered, shaking her head. I can't believe you're doing this over a sock and a t-shirt. A bitter laugh escaped me, short and humorless. Overreacting? I repeated. You really think that's all this is? That I just randomly decided to pick a fight with you over some laundry? I found that sock under our bed, Lauren. I smelled that shirt in our bathroom. Do you honestly think I'm that stupid? Her jaw tightened, her nostrils flaring slightly, and I knew then that she wasn't going to give me the truth, not willingly, at least. She had already committed to her version of events, and no matter how much evidence I threw at her, she would keep twisting it, keep gaslighting me, until I either accepted her or walked away. I leaned back in my chair, studying her, my anger simmering beneath the surface. All right, I said, my voice eerily calm now. Then let's check the security cameras. Her entire body stiffened. It was subtle, just a fraction of a second where her muscles tensed, her breath hitched, and her eyes darted to the side before snapping back to me. That was it. That was the confirmation I needed. If she was innocent, she would have rolled her eyes, told me to go ahead, laughed at how ridiculous I was being. But she didn't. She froze. And that told me everything. Daniel, come on, she said, her tone shifting again, this time trying for something softer, more reasonable. You seriously want to go that far over this? I nodded. Yeah, I do. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, to tell me how ridiculous I was being, but she caught herself before the words left her mouth. She knew she was fucked. She knew the cameras would show something she couldn't talk her way out of. She tried one last time, reaching for the only option she had left. "I can't believe you don't trust me," she murmured, shaking her head, her voice laced with just the right amount of hurt to make any other man doubt himself. "After everything we've been through, you'd really rather believe some insane idea in your head instead of me?" I didn't blink. "Let's check the cameras," I repeated. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken truths, with the weight of everything she was trying to keep buried. I watched her face, watched the way her mind scrambled for a way out, for an excuse, for anything that could keep her from walking into the trap she had set for herself. And then, finally, she exhaled, slow and shaky, and lowered her gaze to the floor. "I deleted the footage," she said, barely above a whisper. A slow, cold wave of realization washed over me, numbing everything in its path. I stared at her, my heart hammering in my chest, my fingers curling into my palms. "What?" She swallowed hard, her eyes still locked on the floor. She paused, inhaled sharply, then looked up at me with something resembling remorse, but it was too late for that. "I deleted the footage this morning." I laughed, a real laugh this time, dark and bitter and laced with so much disgust I could taste it on my tongue. "You really thought that was going to make this better?" I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. "That wiping the evidence would somehow erase what you did?" She had no response, because we both knew exactly what deleting the footage meant. And in that moment, whatever was left of my trust in her, whatever thread had been holding our marriage together, snapped completely. I stared at Lauren, my jaw locked so tight it felt like my teeth might crack. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't say a single word to defend herself, because there was nothing left to say. She had deleted the security footage, not because she was worried about privacy or space on the hard drive, but because she knew what it contained. She knew the moment I saw it, there would be no more pretending, no more lies, no more pathetic attempts to manipulate me into believing I was just being paranoid. Every fiber of my being wanted to explode, to scream, to grab my laptop and start running recovery software to see if there was anything left of that footage. But deep down, I already knew the answer. She had erased it the moment she realized I was suspicious. I ran a hand down my face, trying to steady my breathing, trying to stop my hands from shaking, not out of sadness, but out of pure, unfiltered rage. "Tell me when it started," I said, my voice low and steady, but there was a sharpness to it that made her flinch. "Tell me how long you've been with him in my house." Lauren let out a breath, slow and controlled, like she was still trying to think her way out of this. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, arms crossed over her chest, her eyes flickering toward the door as if she was considering just walking away. But she didn't. She knew she owed me that much, even if she didn't want to admit it. "It's not what you think," she finally muttered, and the sheer audacity of those words made my vision blur with anger. I slammed my fist down on the table, so hard the plastic bag with the sock and t-shirt jumped. "Don't you dare say that to me right now," I snapped, my patience completely gone. "You deleted the footage. You lied to my face. You think I'm just going to sit here and listen to you insult my intelligence? Either you tell me the truth, or I swear to God, I'll go find it myself." Her lip trembled for a split second before she caught herself, swallowing down whatever pathetic excuse she had planned. She turned away, rubbing her forehead, inhaling deeply like she needed to gather strength just to say it out loud. "It's been a couple of months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe 3. I nodded, my jaw clenching so tight it ached. "Who?" She didn't answer right away, and for a moment, I thought she was going to try and protect him, but eventually, she let out a defeated sigh. "Tyler." The name didn't register at first, but then it hit me. Tyler. The guy from her work. The one she had mentioned a few times in passing, always casually, always with that indifferent tone that made me think nothing of it. The one who she had reassured me was just a coworker, just someone she barely even spoke to outside of work. The one I had never considered a threat because I had been too busy trusting my wife like an idiot. I ran a hand through my hair, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Where?" She hesitated again, and I could already guess the answer before she even opened her mouth. "Here," she finally admitted, confirming what I already knew but still didn't want to hear. "When you were at work. Sometimes after a night shift." A sharp, burning sensation settled in my chest, the kind that made it hard to breathe. In our bed? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. She swallowed, her eyes darting toward the floor. Once, she said, and I almost laughed at how ridiculous it was that she thought that made difference. I exhaled slowly, trying to force the anger down, but it was pointless. It was there, it was real, and it wasn't going anywhere. And you thought deleting the security footage would just make all of this go away? She let out a shaky breath. I didn't know what else to do. I shook my head in disbelief, stepping back. Not to her. I wasn't that kind of man, but to everything around me. I wanted to break something, destroy something, make her feel just an ounce of the destruction she had brought into my life. You're disgusting, I muttered, more to myself than to her. You brought some pathetic little punk into my house, into my bed, and you thought I'd never find out. She finally lifted her head, her expression shifting into something defensive. I didn't plan for this to happen, she snapped, her voice sharp now, like she was trying to make me feel guilty for reacting the way any sane person would. It just happened, Daniel. Things between us haven't been the same for a while, and I let out a short, humorless laugh, cutting her off. Oh, with that excuse. You could have talked to me. You could have told me if something was wrong. But instead, you went behind my back and let some boy sleep with you while I was out working to pay for this house, for everything you own. Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, but she had nothing. She knew I was right. She knew there was nothing she could say to justify what she had done. I grabbed the plastic bag off the table, shoved the sock and shirt back inside, and walked toward the door. Where are you going? She asked, her voice shaking now, panic creeping in. I turned back just enough to look at her, my expression cold, detached, to make sure that his never steps foot near my house again. Lauren stood frozen as I walked past her, the plastic bag with the evidence of her betrayal clenched in my hand. I didn't give her another glance, didn't wait for another excuse, because there was nothing she could say that would make this any better. I stepped out of the house, slammed the door behind me, and headed straight for my car. My mind was already set. I wasn't going to sit in that house and let her lies keep swirling around me like poison. I needed to see this guy, needed to look him in the face and make sure he understood exactly what he had done. The drive was a blur, my hands gripping the wheel so tight that my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded against my ribs, not from fear, but from the sheer, raw anger burning inside me. I didn't care what I was going to do when I saw him. I didn't even have a plan. I just knew that he wasn't getting away with this. He wasn't going to pretend like he hadn't just blown up my life. He was going to know exactly who he had been messing with. I pulled into the hospital parking lot, barely bothering to park straight. My feet hit the pavement hard as I marched toward the entrance, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't know exactly where Tyler would be, but I wasn't going to leave until I found him. I pushed through the doors, my eyes scanning the lobby for any sign of him. A woman behind the desk glanced up at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "Can I help you?" she asked, but I ignored her, my focus already locked onto a familiar figure walking down the hallway. Tyler. He wasn't anything special, just some scrawny kid who looked like he still belonged in college, his scrubs a little too loose on his frame. But what made my blood boil was the way he walked, like he had nothing to worry about, like he hadn't been sneaking around behind my back, like he hadn't been in my house, in my bed, touching my wife like he had any right to. I didn't wait. I didn't stop to think. I just moved. Tyler barely had time to register what was happening before I was in front of him, grabbing the front of his scrubs. His eyes went wide, panic flashing across his face as he tried to process what was happening. "Hey, what the? You really thought I wouldn't find out?" I cut him off, my voice low but sharp, every word dripping with the kind of anger that made people take a step back. His mouth opened like he wanted to deny it, but I didn't give him the chance. I lifted the plastic bag between us and shoved it against his chest. "Recognize these?" He looked down at the bag, his face draining of color as he saw the sock and the crumpled-up shirt. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to push me away. "Look, man, Shut up," I snapped, slamming him against the wall again, harder this time. "You think you're some kind of player? You think sneaking around with another man's wife makes you a real man?" People were staring now, passing by, but I didn't care. Let them watch. Let them see exactly what happens when someone thinks they can screw around without consequences. Tyler's eyes darted around the hallway, his panic growing as he realized there was no easy way out of this. I didn't. "Don't lie to me," I growled, my grip tightening on his scrubs. "You were in my house. You were in my bed. And now you're going to act like you don't know what I'm talking about. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He wasn't slick. He wasn't confident. He was a coward, just like I had expected. Daniel, let him go. The voice came from behind me, and I already knew who it was before I even turned around. Lauren. Of course, she had followed me. She never wanted a real confrontation, never wanted to face what she had done, but she couldn't stand not being in control. She stepped closer, her expression tight, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. This isn't the place for this, she hissed, her eyes darting to the people watching. Let him go. I let out a sharp breath, my grip still firm on Tyler's shirt. I could see the fear in his eyes now, the way his breathing had turned shallow. I wasn't going to hit him. He wasn't worth it. But he needed to understand something. I leaned in, my voice just loud enough for him to hear. You ever come near my house again, I won't just be talking next time. Do you understand me? He nodded so fast it was almost pathetic. He didn't look back. He just turned and walked away as fast as he could, disappearing around the corner like the coward he was. Lauren exhaled, rubbing her temples like she had a headache. You've made your point, she muttered, her voice laced with frustration. Can we go now? I turned to her slowly, taking in the sight of the woman I had once loved, the woman I had trusted, the woman who had stood in my home and lied to my face. I felt nothing for her now. No sadness, no longing, no pain. Just emptiness. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore, I said, my voice calm, detached. We're done. Her face barely changed, but I saw it, the slight flicker of something in her eyes, the realization that she had finally lost control of the situation. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, like she wanted to say something that would make this all go away. But I was already walking past her, out of the hospital, away from the life that she had so carelessly destroyed. Lauren followed me out, her footsteps quick and uneven behind me as I walked toward my car without looking back. I could hear her breathing, hear the way she was trying to figure out what to say, how to make herself the victim, how to manipulate the situation into something she could still control. I wasn't interested in hearing any of it. She had spent months lying, sneaking around, making excuses, and now that everything was out in the open, she was scrambling. But it was too late. The damage was done, and nothing she said could fix it. Daniel, stop, she finally said, her voice sharp with frustration as she caught up to me. You can't just walk away like this. We need to talk. I pulled my car keys from my pocket and didn't even slow down. No, we don't. Yes, we do, she insisted, stepping in front of me, forcing me to stop. You can't just decide we're done without even having a conversation. This isn't just about you. I exhaled through my nose, staring at her, trying to understand what part of this she thought was still up for debate. You think this is a discussion? I asked, my voice level, but cold. You think after everything, after lying to my face, after bringing that guy into my house, I owe you a conversation? She folded her arms, her nails digging into her own skin, her expression flickering between anger and desperation. I made a mistake, she said, her voice quieter now, like she thought she could still soften the situation, as if changing her tone would erase what she had done. I messed up, and I know that, but you don't just throw away a marriage over one mistake. I let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking my head as I took a step back from her. One mistake. I repeated, my hands tightening into fists at my sides. You call months of sneaking around a mistake? You think deleting the security footage was just an accident? You didn't mess up, Lauren. You made a choice. Over and over again. And now you want to stand here and act like this was some temporary lapse in judgment? Her face twisted, her frustration breaking through. I didn't plan for this to happen, she snapped, her voice rising. I didn't wake up one day and decide to ruin our marriage. Things between us haven't been right for a long time, and you know it. I stared at her, my jaw clenching so hard it hurt. And whose fault is that? I asked, my voice sharp. Did I cheat? Did I lie? Did I bring someone into our house and then try to cover my tracks? No, Lauren, you did that. So don't stand here and act like we were some broken couple and this was inevitable. You had options. You could have talked to me, told me how you felt. You could have left. She looked away, her lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't like hearing it, didn't like the truth being thrown back in her face. I was lonely, she said finally, her voice quieter, like she thought that excuse would be enough. I felt like I wasn't important to you anymore. I inhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay calm, even though every single word out of her mouth only made me angrier. So your solution to that was to sleep with some random guy from work? I asked, my voice flat. Instead of talking to me? Instead of trying to fix whatever you thought was wrong? She swallowed hard, and for a brief second, I thought she was going to break, but she caught herself, straightening her shoulders, her face hardening. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she muttered, shaking her head. It was never supposed to mean anything. I laughed again, shaking my head. Oh, well, that makes me feel so much better, I said, the sarcasm dripping from my words. It didn't mean anything? That's your defense? That just makes it worse, Lauren. You threw away our marriage for nothing. For some kid who probably doesn't even care about you. And now you're standing here trying to justify it like that somehow makes it better. Her expression flickered, a mix of guilt and defiance, like she wanted to argue but didn't have anything left to say. So that's it, she asked finally, her voice tight. You're just going to walk away? Just like that. I took a deep breath, running a hand through my hair, exhaustion settling into my bones. What else is there to do? I asked, my voice quieter now, but firm. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Her eyes searched mine, like she was trying to find something, some hesitation, some weakness, anything that she could latch onto. But there was nothing left. Whatever love, trust, or connection we had, she had killed it the second she let someone else into our life. She let out a shaky breath, her arms dropping to her sides. And what about everything we built? She whispered, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing the life we had built together, the stability, the comfort. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. You burned it to the ground, Lauren, I said simply. There's nothing left. She opened her mouth, like she wanted to fight it, like she wanted to argue that there was still something to save, but she knew it was pointless. She had done this. She had destroyed us. And now she had to live with it. I stepped around her, walking to my car, opening the door without another glance in her direction. She didn't try to stop me this time. She just stood there, watching, as I got in, and pulled away, leaving her behind. Leaving was the only option. Staying in that house, in the same space where trust had been shattered, would have been nothing more than a slow, drawn-out death of whatever was left of my sanity. The moment I drove away, the weight pressing on my chest started to lift, even if the anger still burned deep inside me. I had spent months, maybe even years, believing in something that was already broken. Now, there was nothing left to believe in, and for the first time in a long time, I had clarity. The first few nights were strange. Sleeping in a hotel room with my suitcase propped against the wall, I lay awake longer than I wanted to, not because I missed her, but because my mind couldn't stop replaying everything I had ignored. The late nights, the sudden secrecy, the way she had pulled away slowly over time until she was barely present even when she was right next to me. I had seen it happening but had convinced myself that it was just stress, that every couple went through phases like this, that it was temporary. It wasn't. The truth had been staring me in the face, and I had chosen to look the other way until I no longer had a choice. Filing for divorce was easier than I expected. There were no long arguments, no dramatic fights over assets, no begging or bargaining. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to save, or maybe she had already started planning for a future without me. Either way, I didn't care. The house was hers, though I doubted it would feel like home to her anymore. I took what mattered, my personal savings, the car, and my dignity, which she had spent months trying to erase. The anger didn't disappear overnight, and maybe it never would. It lingered beneath the surface, creeping up at random moments, like when I passed by a couple holding hands at a restaurant, or when I heard a song that used to play in our house. It wasn't jealousy. It was frustration at how easily everything had been destroyed, how little effort she had put into protecting what we had built. But the difference now was that I wasn't going to let that anger control me. I had wasted enough time thinking about her. Now, it was time to think about myself. Work became my escape. Instead of dragging myself through the day, weighed down by thoughts of the past, I poured myself into my job. The hours stretched longer, the projects became more intense, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward instead of standing still. The people around me noticed. Friends who had kept their distance when everything first happened started coming back around, checking in, inviting me out. At first, I turned them down, not because I wanted to be alone, but because I needed to figure out who I was outside of that relationship. When I was ready, I reconnected. I went out. I talked. I listened. And I reminded myself that life didn't end just because one person had decided to betray me. I started traveling again, something I hadn't done in years because I had been too focused on making a home with someone who clearly never valued it. I went to places I had always said I wanted to see, met people who had no idea about my past, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. The lesson was hard. No matter how much effort you put into something, no matter how loyal, devoted, or understanding you are, you cannot force someone to value you. Love is a choice, and she had made hers a long time ago. The mistake I had made was assuming that just because I loved her, she would always love me back. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. Moving forward wasn't about closing myself off or being afraid to trust. It was about making sure that whoever came into my life next actually deserved to be there. It was about understanding that my worth wasn't defined by whether or not someone else saw it. It was about never again settling for someone who didn't see me as enough. Months later, I barely thought about her. The resentment had faded into something dull, something that no longer had the power to control me. The past was exactly that, the past, and I was finally free from it.